BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And just a quick reminder, every Monday is Zodiac Mondays. Wednesday is an Ask Me Anything. That's an AMA, so please drop your questions below for things that you would like discussed here on the show. And Friday is an Anything Goes. Any subject is fair game, mostly talking about true crime, serial killers, the Zodiac Killer, but any subject is welcome. All right, so please share some ideas in the comment section about what you would like to hear about on this channel, and let's get started. Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to the show. We will be continuing with a series of episodes that have been coming out about the disappearance and murder of Joan Webster. This is part of an ongoing series, but I want the episodes to be arranged in any particular order, and they are meant to be standalones, or you can listen to them as part of the continuing discussion that's been coming out here on Black Box Online Radio, and that always means that it's a good time to subscribe to the channel. I've been corresponding with Eve Carson, who was the sister-in-law of Joan Webster. She's also the author of the book Mommy's a Mole, which examines not only the murder of Joan Webster, but also her parents' involvement with the CIA, George and Eleanor Webster. So in regards to this, I think we can just begin from the very beginning and have a very small introduction. Joan Webster went missing in November of 1981 after leaving Logan Airport in Boston, Massachusetts. She was missing for nearly 10 years because in 1990 her skeletal remains were discovered. First, the skull was noticed by someone who was out walking her dog, and she saw something in the woods that she didn't recognize, so she approached it, and it turned out that it was a human skull, and it belonged to Joan Webster. And over that 9-year period, the skull and the rest of her skeleton had been separated, and a number of days later, they found the rest of Joan Webster's skeletal remains in Massachusetts, and I believe in the town of Hamilton. But I've been corresponding with Eve Carson, who has shared with me not only her theories, but also some information about the case. Joan Webster is a person that we learn about because of her connections to the Zodiac Killer mystery. In 1987, Gareth Penn published a book called Time 17, where he stated that he thought that the Zodiac Killer was responsible for Joan Webster's death or disappearance at the time. There's something that we will explore with that later on in the episode, so please stay tuned. But Eve Carson definitely dismisses any Zodiac Killer connection to Joan Webster. And first, let's hear a little bit more about Joan Webster as a person, because I wrote to Eve Carson and I asked her, what was Joan like? You knew her. Can you share some info about her personality? And Eve Carson has written here, and I quote, Joan was a peach. I don't know anyone who didn't absolutely love her. She had a very infectious giggle and always had a smile on her face. She was a very dedicated student with a bright future in front of her. I know several guys she dated, very preppy types. Most parents would love them. She didn't want to get into a serious relationship when she was at Harvard. She wanted to finish her degree, and Joan Webster was an architecture student. That Thanksgiving, she did have a friend coming to meet the parents in New Jersey, but the plans changed. This guy happened to be an undergrad friend of my brother's. He went to Harvard Business School, where he met Joan. He had already graduated and was in Detroit when Joan disappeared. And yes, Joan disappeared on the 28th of November 1981, coming back from Thanksgiving break. And at Christmas, we went back to New Jersey. This is later on the year. Where Eve Carson grew up in the embracing family. The Websters were very stoic, which was always foreign to Eve, but Eve didn't judge how they reacted with the circumstances. Neither George nor Eleanor Webster cried. George came into the living room on Christmas morning and announced, "She is gone. We have to move on," in a very matter-of-fact way. So as we explore the bizarre and suspicious circumstances surrounding the murder of Joan Webster, I think it's important to recognize that possibilities will be put on the table, and this is a story that is going to have a very dark turn. But as I was talking about this with Eve Carson, she did remind me that all murder cases are dark, but we'll see that there's an especially sinister element that may be in play here. From the title of this episode, you can see that this is going to be about the theory that Eve Carson puts forward that her sister-in-law, Joan Webster, was murdered and some type of police cover-up was involved to conceal the truth. Now, let's go right to the heart and soul of the issue. Eve Carson has claimed that she has uncovered documentation that shows that two police officers, Carmen Tomorrow and Andrew Palumbo, knew the correct manner of Joan Webster's death nearly 7 years prior to her remains being discovered in 1990, April of 1990 to be precise. So, what does this suggest? That means that there must have been some inside knowledge, either that or it was just sheer dumb luck, some comment off the top of somebody's head, either that or they did indeed know the correct manner of her death and what had happened to her, because the authorities in the early 1980s were pushing the angle that Joan Webster was murdered and that her body had been dumped at sea. She had been murdered by someone known as Leonard Paradiso, and that she had been either buried at sea or her body had been dumped in the Boston harbor. But Eve Carson was a bit skeptical of that story, and what happened was Joan Webster definitely wasn't buried at sea because her remains were found on land. So I would like to read off this next message that is involving the Webster family in general, because this is all going to be tied into who would want Joan Webster dead, why was her body found on land, why were the police wrong about this theory where Joan was buried at sea. Eve Carson writes, and I quote, "Let me begin by emphasizing the Websters were very image conscious. It's a patriarchal family. George was very controlling. They were smart people. They were not deceived by the Paradiso story, that is, that Joan was buried at sea. Source documents confirmed they had exculpatory evidence in their possession. In 2001, I discovered a very unsettling letter. The letter contained allegations against the Webster family. It was evidence of another victim connected to the Websters. When I found the letter, I immediately sought help. I have corroborating and contemporaneous evidence. I can't prove or disprove the allegations. The family was very angry. I did not keep it in the family, but sought outside guidance. Even though I do not know what happened, the author of the letter had given testimony. It's documented in a court proceeding. Based on the testimony and the behavior of the family, my inclination is to believe the allegations were true. If true, a member of the Webster family committed a felony. I did take the documents to my local FBI office and told that it should be investigated. If true, Joan may have had some knowledge of that type of behavior at least. The allegations would be devastating to the family image. I hope you heard that sentence clearly. Joan may have had some knowledge of that type of behavior at least. The allegations would be devastating for the family image. And let me detail some considerations I factor in about George, and that was another quotation from Eve Carson's message. Joan's plans changed over the break, and she went back early. She did not ride back with Anne on Sunday. Her plans to have the guest in New Jersey changed. The change was probably to accommodate George Webster's travel plans. George, of course, is her father. He traveled at some point over the weekend. Over the years, I came to understand that it would be out of character for George to disrupt his vacations or holidays for a trip, even business. He was a senior executive and would have delegated. My recollection is confirmed by a quote Eleanor gave to the press. George was one of the few people who had knowledge where Joan would be at Logan. He probably booked Joan's flight, but the second line into their home was never reported or checked. It was George's private line. I still have a record of that number. And I think you can see where this is going, but I'll just read off the conclusion. Joan knew the man and trusted him to change vehicles. That's the man that would have taken her from Logan Airport. George fits the bill, ungroomed. George's hair was dark and had curls, although not as curly as the composite. He had wire-rimmed glasses with rounded edges. the stature of the man at Logan fits George very closely. George was clean-shaven. He did not have a beard. When looking at the description, I put things into two categories: things that can be disguised and things that can be easily disguised. The man was wearing an overcoat, and that is exactly how George would have dressed that night. They went to cocktail parties before driving Joan to Logan. Now, I think that there are two major pieces in here that we have to discuss first. The first part of Eve Carson's message about how the Websters are very image conscious, they have a connection to the CIA, senior executive. That there also is some wrongdoing that has taken place that Eve Carson has found about some type of felony, which I think you could gather from that email. Even those details are not made available to the general public, but some felonious action occurred in the past, and I even have to read this again for the third time. George was one of the few people who would have had knowledge where Joan would be at Logan. He probably booked her flights, but they never checked his second line. I mean, this is the dark turn I was talking about. It's just difficult for me to even say out loud that George Webster may be accused of having some involvement with his daughter's disappearance and murder. And that is definitely something that sounds so heinous, especially because of what's going on here, that it's about image, it's about dirty secrets. I mean, to go to that level of evil just to protect some type of closely guarded family secret, I mean, that's some serious, serious evil in the world. But I do confess crazier things had happened. But I mean, let's read it one more time. If true, a member of the Webster family committed a felony. I took the documents to the local FBI office, and they said it should be investigated. If true, Joan may have had knowledge of that type of behavior at least. When I was discussing this with Eve Carson, I wanted to look at the major theories that were involved with the disappearance of Joan Webster and why this police cover-up could have taken place. Because if you follow Eve Carson's material, and she has videos out on YouTube as well as being interviewed, you hear all these things about a police cover-up, and, well, my inclination, or not even an inclination, my absolute first instinct was she was going to accuse these two police officers, Andrew Palumbo and Carmen Tamaro, of abducting Joan, and some type of sexual assault had taken place, and that they murdered Joan and they buried her body in the woods, and they were going to blame it on this person, Leonard Paradiso, who was going to be somewhat of a fall guy for serial killer, for victims that they could attribute to a serial killer. The police are committing crimes and they're blaming it on a serial killer. And we're going to say a lot about that on next Wednesday's AMA, because I'm noticing a very large pattern with this in some other cases, particularly, well, we'll save that stuff for Wednesday's AMA. But the thing that I couldn't quite understand is it does not appear that there is any type of sexual assault that would have taken place, or that's the motivation for Palumbo and Tamaro to go about this. Granted, her remains were found 9 years after she had disappeared. I think a lot of physical evidence would not exist at the time of the discovery, but it really appeared that it was not what Eve Carson was trying to do, and that's not really the theory that she's putting forward. And this whole notion of Joan Webster being murdered, perhaps even orchestrated by her own family. I mean, it's sickening to think about. But the two other major possibilities in this case, aside from anything to do with this police cover-up because of a connection the Websters have to Andrew Palumbo and Carmen Tamaro, is the Zodiac Killer and the suspects Michael O'Hare and Gareth Penn. Gareth Penn, of course, wrote the book Time 17. He was a researcher who went on to become a suspect himself, and the accusations about the Zodiac Killer connection to Joan Webster, or more or less that she was murdered as part of some giant criminal masterpiece that is meant to be filled with mathematical signatures. But in regards to the police cover-up, I would like to read another message that Eve Carson has sent to me about the murder of Joan Webster, and this is the one where she begins by saying, "Any murder case is dark. About half the way into researching Joan's case, I spoke with FBI Special Agent Carrazzo. His first comment, he would have started by looking at family and close relationships of the victims." And I mean, this is standard procedure. They look at family members or people who are close to the victims. Still, though, I mean, that is just from following other true crime cases. I can tell you that you listen to Forensic Files and 48 Hours, Dateline, some other shows like that. Normally, when a family member is involved with the murder of another family member, it's number one, a crime that got too heated and somebody snapped and, like, in a fit of rage they murdered somebody. And then there are also the things where someone is murdered for insurance money and there's that motive. But then, like, sometimes you would have somebody who is going to cause a type of betrayal, and they feel jeopardized or compromised. And I think that's what's going on in this one. It would be the third possibility that Joan had information. And I'm not accusing George Webster of doing anything to his daughter, and I don't even think that Eve Carson is directly accusing him. She's insinuating it, yes, but it's not like a direct accusation. It's more or less talking about the necessity of looking at people who are close to the victim. But that's what it is. Someone had information. I mean, these crimes definitely do happen where someone is they believe that this person might go to the authorities or has the potential or the ability to go to the authorities about a closely guarded family secret. And as I said, crazier things have happened. But okay, so the FBI needs to look at family and close relationships of the victim. That never happened in the case of Joan Webster. Going back to Eve's message, and I quote, "That never happened. George was very influential in his direction of the investigation. Parents of a murder victim who lie about it are suspects. That is a given. There was something that was hidden. George fits the description of the man who picked Joan Webster up at the airport, but in most ways, not in all ways. I cannot say with certainty that the composite is an image of George Webster. However, I cannot cross him off the list. I cannot come up with any good explanation for them knowingly driving off, and to anything else would be a false story. I'm not interested in airing dirty laundry. The letter I found and other corroborating evidence shows a potential felony. It is a secret the Websters demonstrated they wanted to keep behind closed doors. Even just the allegation, Special Agent Carrazzo agreed, if true, it could be a motive. So, I mean, being 100% clear, I mean, I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but this would be a motive that has been established. There is this felony family secret, and they did not want to get it to get out to the public. As I indicated before, it involves another possible victim. It is hard to elaborate further without putting that person in a vulnerable position. And even if I had info about that person, I wouldn't read it off on the channel. I mean, there's I think we're already stirring up enough stuff as it is. I'm aware the Webster family has a strong public image. I have known them for many years. Many things I experienced with the family did not fit the image. It has been very painful for me to review the source documents and see how the trust was betrayed. To say the least, it is very unsettling. Nothing would give me greater sense of peace than to verifiably be able to cross them off the list. I am comfortable with you saying I cannot cross George off the list as a suspect. That does not mean I won't if I find verifiable evidence to do so. I took the blinders off to look at everyone. Many people feel empathy for the Websters. I understand that, but I am the one who knows them, that's Eve Carson talking, and went through this nightmare with them. The layer of the onion I'm peeling off right now is the malfeasance of the authorities. There are still 2 or 3 people living that probably don't want to take the heat. Burke and Tomorrow. And we haven't mentioned him yet in this episode. There's Tim Burke, the attorney, who went on to write the book The Paradiso Files, and you've been seeing the image going around across the screen. And The Paradiso Files is available on YouTube, as well as Eve Carson's book Mommy's a Mole. But this will get into even another set of accusations that Leonard Paradiso was someone who was being blamed not only for Joan Webster's murder, but even for additional crimes that could have been attributed to him that he didn't actually commit, and this was done so through the work of Andrew Palumbo. Back to Eve Carson's message. Believe me, it takes a bit of backbone, but this is where the documents lead. I've had my share of slings and arrows thrown my way. On Christmas night 2012, George responded to an email I sent asking about discrepancies I was finding. His response would not fit the image people have of him. His last line was when he wished me to die. And that is the end. Now, to Eve Carson, I really hope that this is not true, that the Websters had their daughter murdered to cover up a family secret, that some type of felony had that had taken place, and that they would have been facing, without knowing what felony it is, I don't know how much time in jail, life in prison maybe, but I would really hope that they were not guilty of murdering their own daughter over that. But in regards to another possibility, right now what I would like to do is to talk about some other suspects in the case of Joan Webster, and one of them is none other than Gareth Penn. Now, one thing that has been shared with me from Joe, who runs the Zodiac Killer Insights channel, is that Gareth Penn could be a suspect in the murder of Joan Webster. Joe is pretty certain that Gareth Penn has connections to the Zodiac Killer crimes, particularly the murder of Sherry Jo Bates, the murder of Nikki Benedict in 1967, and the 5 victims from the canonical Zodiac crimes. I asked Joe, on a scale of 1 to 10, what is the likelihood that you believe that Gareth Penn was involved with the murder of Joan Webster? And he said that it's about a 5, like a 5 out of 10, 10 being the highest. Well, I guess in either way, but I think you can get the idea. Now, here's something that Joe has shared with me. On page 160 of Times 17, Gareth Penn states, and I quote, "I had to guess about where he had, quote-unquote, hidden her body," referring to Joan Webster's final resting place. Why would Gareth Penn state that Joan Webster's body was hidden when the consensus was that Joan was at the bottom of the ocean? And the exact quotation is, "I guess about where he had hidden her body." Then again, on page 243, Gareth Penn states, and I quote, "His intention all along was to hide his last victim." When he mentions last, he is talking about you, Joan. Why hide Joan when you were alleged to be at the bottom of the ocean? And that is just a writing style, like this was written as a letter to Joan Webster from beyond the grave, to use that as an expression. And I can answer this. I can tell you exactly what Gareth Penn was talking about. For once in my life, maybe I can actually understand the message behind Gareth Penn. What does this sentence mean? I had a guess about where he had hidden her body. Oh, I mean, first I can even say Gareth Penn talks about it was at 122 degrees on a map because of Michael O'Hare's birthday, January 22nd. That's 122. I mean, let's get away from that because that's the stuff that I can't really always wrap my head around. I had a guess about where he had hidden her body. This is relating to Gareth Penn's Zodiac Killer theory, right? All right, the murder of Sherry Jo Bates, 1966. She was stabbed. Then you have the murders of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen in 1968. Then you have the murder of Darlene Ferret on the 4th of July, 69. She's shot, right? Then the Lake Berryessa stabbing, where the Zodiac Killer is getting much more up close and personal with the victims, tying them up, stabbing them with a knife, wearing the costume. Then the Zodiac gets into Paul Stein's taxi on October 11th of 1969. He's riding in the back of a car with a victim and fires a gunshot to the head. What does the Zodiac Killer have to do next? He has to commit a murder and hide the body. This is what he's talking about. This book was published in 1987. At the time, Gareth Penn thought that the Zodiac had murdered a victim and buried her body in the ground, or he had buried her at sea, that he had put her in a place in which no one would ever find the body. That's what he thought, that the Zodiac's adding a layer of criminal versatility to the crimes. That's all this sentence means, is that Joan Webster's remains had not been discovered yet. It was 1987 when this book was published. I don't think that that is any type of admission of guilt, that Joan Webster's body was hidden anywhere and moved anywhere. I think that's exactly what was talking about. If you look at forums and comment sections about what people have shared about a theory that the body was moved, I think it relates to a little bit of confusion about this. I was talking to Eve Carson about this theory that was Joan Webster's body moved from one dump site to another, and she says very clearly, no. What this refers to is, there are nearly 9 years from the murder of Joan Webster to the discovery of her remains, 1981 to 1990. And at one point, there had been two pieces of timber that had cut, like two logs that were very large pieces of timber that had been finely cut, and they had been placed over the shallow grave where Joan Webster had been buried. Joan was placed into a trash bag. She had been stripped naked of her clothes, but she still had her jewelry on, and that's what mostly the confusion is, that there had been two logs that had been placed over the gravesite for a while, and by log I mean it's more like a cut piece of a tree trunk, it sounds like, a giant piece of timber, and they had been resting there for a while, and then those logs were moved away at a certain point. So that is the confusion. It's just, for a while there were two logs over the area where Joan Webster's skeleton was, and then later on they were moved. The logs were moved. The body was not moved. Just being clear about that. So I think Gareth Penn is simply just saying, I want to be 100%, make sure nobody misunderstands this. All he is saying is that at the time of writing this, Joan Webster's remains had not been found, and he thinks that the Zodiac Killer wanted to commit a crime and the remains of a victim would never be discovered. It's like, the criminal masterpiece, the mathematical signatures, adding a layer of criminal versatility. Do I think that that's exactly what happened to Joan Webster? No, I don't. In fact, I don't think there's any Zodiac involvement at all with Joan Webster. If I can be 100% honest with you as well, I would expect that Joan Webster got involved with the Zodiac Killer mystery because Gareth Penn wanted to do something to stand out from the crowd. He wanted to create this type of Massachusetts connection to make his Zodiac Killer book a little bit more unique, and then he even found a suspect, Michael Henry O'Hare, who was just the most likely candidate that would match up with all of these mathematical observations. And I think that's where I'm going with this. He wanted to write a book about the mathematical observations in the Zodiac Killer mystery, but by talking about Michael O'Hare, by talking about Joan Webster, he had something in his book that very few other people, maybe nobody else, was talking about, and that is this Massachusetts connection to the Zodiac Killer mystery. That's all that I think that it was. And in regards to Eve Carson's police cover-up theory, it appears that, yes, indeed, the family members are going to have a much larger role in this, and that these two detectives, Carmen Tomorrow and Andrew Palumbo, may have been committing crimes and then blaming that on the serial killer Leonard Paradiso. It really depends on how influential somebody like George Webster could have been, because the average person obviously can't direct the course of an investigation. But at this time I would like to talk about some info in regards to how Joan Webster was killed. I did say that she was murdered with blunt force trauma, to the best of our knowledge, although Joe from Zodiac Killer Insights did share something with me that she did have two broken ribs, so there could have been something about how some other type of injury had taken place. 9 years after she was murdered, it's a lot of the physical evidence no longer remained. Eve Carson has written me one thing here that says, Joan was struck in the head. The allegation was that it was a whiskey bottle, but the trauma to her skull is too extensive. And yeah, that was it, that Leonard Paradiso had lured her to the boat and struck her in the head with a whiskey bottle. But the trauma to her skull is too extensive. Bond and the cops saw the liquor bottles in the photo in Paradiso's cell. No liquor bottles or glass shards, as Burke claimed, were found on the boat when recovered. This is, as I said, part of an ongoing series, but if this is going to be a standalone episode, I should also share something from the previous segment. that had come out recently. It was called "Who Killed Joan Webster?" Sorry, no, "Who Murdered Joan Webster?" Update, and that is that the boat that they're talking about didn't even exist at the time. It sank in the summer of 1981, and Joan Webster disappeared in November of 1981, so it wasn't even around. And there's this. I mean, there's no possible way that Leonard Paradiso dumped her off of the boat that they're talking about, because it sank in the summer. It was at the bottom of the harbor, more or less. So, and of course, there wouldn't be any murder weapon on the boat or any type of glass shards that once the boat was raised. Well, obviously not. I mean, that was just not possible. Joan Webster's death certificate confirms blunt force trauma to the head as the cause and manner of her death. And Bond, we haven't mentioned him yet. His name is Robert Bond. He is a jailhouse informant who turned over information about Leonard Paradiso. Robert Bond details the blow to head in his MSP interview transcript, and the written letter came later. He also indicated that she had a large hole in her head and pointed to the right side. This is very specific. Those details came through to Bond in January of 1983 after talking to Tomorrow and Palumbo, foundation of the police cover-up. It was not confirmed until Joan surfaced in April 1990. Here is how the pieces fit together for us at this time. However, I will always remain open to new information. I believe Palumbo was directly involved. He fits too many of the known locations in Joan's case, and I live close to the gravesite. Oh, and lived close to the gravesite. Excuse me, I misread that. He fits too many known locations and lived close to the gravesite. I believe Carmen Tomorrow had his back and came up with the Paradiso angle. Tomorrow and Palumbo both knew him. Palumbo from his role in the Iannuzzi murder, and as I said, they're blaming multiple crimes on Leonard Paradiso. In this murder that I just said, that was one in which the boyfriend was a very likely suspect, according to Eve Carson, and they blamed the murder on Paradiso because the boyfriend had a connection to Andrew Palumbo. Palumbo from his role in the Iannuzzi murder, and Tomorrow grew up with him in the Northeast. Palumbo lived in a small house in Peabody, Massachusetts with 4 little kids. Motive was probably money, that's a guess. He had very expensive hobbies with cars and motorcycles. And here's something that it took me a long time to understand. Palumbo is not described as the murderer. I mean, not 100%. I mean, based on the information that we've been through in this episode, I don't even know if we're even at that level about who would have delivered the fatal blow that killed Joan Webster. He's more described, based on my understanding, as an active participant in the crime. But let's see. Palumbo and Tomorrow had some identifiable connections with the mob and mafia activities in Boston. It was very dysfunctional in the 1980s, and a lot of corruption. The key for me is the man who maneuvered Joan to the second car. I believe Palumbo and Tomorrow aided and abetted the man at Logan Airport. The bearded man was the one with the motive. And you've been seeing the composite going around, albeit it is the composite sketch next to Gareth Penn, courtesy of the Zodiac Killer Insight series. The last thing that I will say about that is that when you look at the situation, you not only have to think about how Joan Webster would have left Logan Airport, she's coming back from Thanksgiving break, and that is another reason why Eve Carson suspects that George Webster may have had something to do with this, or that he might even be the man in that composite. In regards to who would she feel comfortable with leaving the airport with, I don't know about you guys, but from the women that I've known who are in their 20s, they wouldn't just accept a ride from a stranger. They wouldn't just accept a ride from even a casual acquaintance if they already have a taxi or they have the access to taxis at the airport, as everybody does, or other forms of transportation. I mean, this is Boston. This is hardly some little airstrip in the middle of nowhere. They would definitely have the ability to get to where they're going. I mean, it seems like somebody was there that Joan Webster definitely felt comfortable moving around with. The only other thing to say in favor of this being some unknown serial killer is they say that serial killers are very good at making people feel comfortable and persuasive, and they're the type of people that you would get into a car with them when you wouldn't go with the average person. They're very good at creating that false facade. And which one is it? I mean, was she lured to a location by her father and then set up, or was this the case of a genuine serial killer who took Joan Webster to a different location? Or do you believe that the police cover-up was involved and that maybe the police officers were the ones that did something to Joan Webster? I think I've taken a harsh stance on this Zodiac killer angle, and I definitely do not believe that this was any type of involvement with the Zodiac killer. But that's just me. I mean, like, you can discuss this in the comments section below. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. You can also follow the show on Instagram, BlackBoxNed88, and I will see you over there for the Instagram bonus podcast. Okay, that's all for me now. Until next time.